She said, I went to the store shopping, she said, and this lady cash register drove not over, he went over. And she said, I called Elvis.
Before she died, the former Graceland maid who spent a decade inside Elvis Presley's inner world suddenly broke her silence, and what she told shocked fans worldwide. Nancy Rooks kept quiet for many years, no interviews and no drama. However, in her final months, she spoke up for the first time. And what she said about Elvis's dying hours contradicts the story we've always heard. Was the king of rock and roll hiding anything behind the Graceland walls? This is not simply a rumor. It's a first-hand testimony from someone who was present, and her confession alters everything. The woman behind the mansion's walls. Before the tours, velvet ropes, and gift stores, Graceland was just a house, lived in, dirty and active. And in the heart of that house lived a woman few people outside the Presley circle knew by name, Nancy Rooks. She didn't wear rhinestones, sing, or appear in a tabloid. However, Nancy remained a part of Elvis's private life for 10 key years, from 1967 to his death in 1977, and even beyond that. She wasn't hired because of celebrity ties or Hollywood favors. Nancy came to Graceland by chance, a temporary assignment through an agency, a one-time duty to assist someone else when they were sick. But Vernon Presley saw something in her, her work ethic. I appreciated her calm demeanor and invited her to remain. What began as a one-time favor evolved into a full-time post within one of America's most iconic mansions. Initially, she was only supposed to clean, but this gradually grew. Nancy became Elvis's cook, frequently providing his favorite down-home Southern fare, peanut butter and banana sandwiches, fried pickles, meatloaf, and cornbread. She made it all, typically about midnight because Elvis did not follow anyone else's schedule. He would get up late, eat late, and party even later. Nancy changed her life to match that pace. Her shift normally began at 5 p.m. with breakfast for Elvis and lasted into midnight. Elvis would walk down barefoot or in slippers, his hair still unkempt, smiling or silent depending on his mood. But she didn't simply feed the man. She saw him, and not the king, not the icon, the man. The Elvis Presley who lounged around in robes, had spontaneous appetites, and asked basic questions like, "Do you have any peach cobbler?" The type that desired company at times, yet preferred alone at others. Nancy was one of the few who recognized the difference, and perhaps that is why he trusted her. She witnessed the parade of visitors who came by, celebrities, bodyguards, girlfriends, and former neighbors. She noticed how many people wanted to impress him and how many relied on him. But she also noticed how fatigued he appeared when the crowd was gone. On nights when the home was unusually quiet, he'd ask her to sing a hymn with him and his grandmother, Minnie May. Sing rather than perform, quietly, inside the kitchen. Nancy didn't gossip or sell stories. Even when others capitalized on the Presley name, she remained silent. When fans wrote letters asking her what he was really like, she responded politely, but never over the line. He was kind, she would say. He was witty and generous, and that was typically it. Years later, when she decided to contribute more, she did so in her own words, writing novels such as The Maid, The Man and the Fans, and Inside Graceland. Even then, the stories were presented with dignity and restraint. They were not exposés. They were glances given by someone who had nothing to gain from embellishing. Rooks provided extensive recollections of daily routines, personal moments, and even the day Elvis died, all delivered with a respectful, affectionate tone. Her writings are regarded for their genuineness and sincere depiction of life with Elvis, providing admirers with priceless insights into the man behind the legend. Even in those works, she left out some details, things she held back, perhaps because of loyalty, perhaps they feared being misunderstood, perhaps because some truths sound heavier when spoken aloud. Nancy Rooks was never on stage or in the spotlight, but she was in the room, on the staircase, inside the kitchen, in a hallway. Every day, you're only a few feet from history. And as time went and the legend of Elvis developed, her recollections remained tucked away, quieter than the loud rumors and films, until, near the end of her life, she decided to gently open that door and finally utter something the world never expected to hear. By the summer of 1977, the atmosphere inside Graceland had changed. There were still bursts of laughing and late-night music, but something about it felt different. The energy was thinner and more strained. Elvis was not quite the same. He was heavier, quieter, more reclusive, and occasionally visible in agony. But he was still trying and going. He has tour dates on his calendar, plans to get back on the road. People frequently forget that. He was about to depart again. Nancy Rooks noted the smallest details. He sat down more slowly. His appetite fluctuates. Some evenings they request entire meals, while others merely want water or juice. The upstairs bathroom had become a sort of secret sanctuary for him. Nobody bothered him there until absolutely necessary. Even so, the staff observed how long he stayed inside. It wasn't only about privacy. It was where he went when he wanted to be alone and out of reach. Elvis had always had unusual tendencies. His sleep cycle was famously flipped upside down. He would be awake by 3 a.m. watching TV or playing racquetball, then falling asleep as the dawn rose. Nancy's routine conformed to the rhythm. She would frequently find herself making breakfast at midnight or preparing dinner when other people were drinking their morning coffee. But in the final days, things became even more uncertain. He was restless. One moment laughing with a companion, the next walking through the hallways, deep in concentration, as if something was pushing on him. Elvis played racquetball at Graceland Court on the day before his death. That detail has been mentioned so many times that it has become part of the official timeline. But what is less frequently reported is how ordinary that day appeared to everyone within the house. He was not bedridden. He was not unconscious. He was constantly moving, laughing, sweating from the game, conversing with security, and going in and out of the kitchen. It did not look like the day before a death, and perhaps that is why it hit so strongly. Nancy recalls the early morning hours on August 16th. He'd just returned from racquetball and was standing on the steps outside the kitchen, exhausted but awake. She offered him breakfast, as she always did. "Do you want anything to eat, Mr. Elvis?" she asked. He shakes his head. "No, I do not want to eat anything right now. I simply want to get some sleep, but I'd like to have some water." That's when she begged Pauline to get him some. In a plastic jug similar to those used for orange juice. They have a side grip. It was a small moment, simple, but Pauline also remembered it. Elvis snatched the water and drank it like he hadn't for months, fast, as if a man were parched. "I've never seen him take that water and drink it the way he did this morning," Pauline said. Nancy brushed it off at the moment. She assured her that he was probably just tired. He has been playing racquetball. He's hot. But in retrospect, that moment shines with spooky clarity. Not because it was so dramatic, but everything was so ordinary. Because this was the last exchange. The final act of compassion from someone who had looked after him for years. He asked for nothing extravagant. He didn't give a huge speech. He only wanted water. Then he headed upstairs. Later that morning, Ginger Alden discovered him in the bathroom, lifeless. The house became silent. Chaos ensued. Paramedics, screams, confusion. But Nancy's loudest sound was something quieter, an echo of a simple request from a man who, for a little while, appeared to be fine, what she has refused to say until now. For decades after Elvis Presley's death, Nancy Rooks was one of Graceland's most respected but least outspoken voices, while many others profited from their connections to the monarch, including former acquaintances, ex-girlfriends, and even distant cousins. Nancy remained mostly silent, not because she lacked stories. She had more than most. However, she carried them like delicate glass. Some things, she concluded, were simply not intended for public consumption. Not yet. Previously, she wrote books. But even at such moments, she was cautious. She never sensationalized. She never portrayed Elvis as a joke or a martyr. She kept the distinction between public memory and private reality clear. Her publications, including Inside Graceland, provided glimpses into the man behind the picture, but always with dignity. Always use restraint. Always use restraint. Readers left with good recollections, not gossip. She had nothing to prove. There are no debts to settle. There is no even score. However, Nancy never wrote down what happened behind closed doors. Things she never discussed on television. Observations gnawed at her. Patterns that made no sense. Elvis made comments that she couldn't forget. Over time, the weight of those details began to shift in shape. Not because she suddenly desired fame, but because she sensed time running out. Because she realized no one else who was actually present would speak up. Nancy became more thoughtful throughout her later years. Friends reported that she would occasionally hint at things people didn't know about Elvis. She never said it bitterly, only with a sense of silent urgency. She began to discuss the tablets more openly. How many were there? How frequently he took them? Not foolishly, but systematically. Even though Elvis was surrounded by doctors, he did not always feel helped. It felt like he was being managed. Nancy never said Elvis wanted to die. In reality, she claimed he didn't. But she thought something vital had been misunderstood. She told a buddy once that he wasn't gone. He was exhausted. He was worn out. But he was still inside, still trying. The pivotal moment came when she was casually asked during a small gathering if there was anything she wished she had spoken publicly about Elvis. Nancy paused. Then he whispered softly, "I don't believe he died the way they say he did." Not really. It was not a conspiracy theory. She was not implying a cover-up or a staged death, but she was implying something deeper. That the account that had been told for decades, that Elvis died of drugs and ill health, was incomplete. That it reduced the complexity of a man who had been struggling while also making plans. Who was thinking about becoming clean? Who had only days before discussed starting again, quietly, privately, somewhere far from Graceland. Nancy had never stated these things in public, but in the months preceding her death, she began to open up. A listener characterized it as a gentle release, as if she'd been holding her breath for 45 years. Now she could finally exhale. She never attempted to change history, but what she did, softly and politely, was add another layer, a final component to the puzzle, a murmur in the background of a story that the world assumed it already knew. And what she said next, in her own words, will forever change how we remember Elvis Presley's dying hours. What did Nancy say prior to her death? It was not a press conference. It was not a headline. It was not intended for the entire planet. But in a tiny taped chat just months before her death, Nancy Rooks, Elvis Presley's longtime maid, cook, and trusted witness, uttered something she had never dared to mention before. With age softening her voice and sharpening her memory, she talked with stunning clarity. Elvis was not what people believe. He wasn't just a lost man waiting to die, and he didn't die as they said he did. For decades, Nancy has responded to queries with grace, never raising the pot. She was known as the calm and loyal one, but this time, something changed. Perhaps it was the nearness of her own death. Perhaps it was because she had lived longer than so many of the others. Or maybe, as she put it, it's simply time. She began by recounting the events of the previous morning, but this time with greater emphasis. He didn't say anything but begged for water. Not food, only water. However, he drank it like he hadn't had anything in days. That remained with me, she explained. He was definitely exhausted, but there was something in his eyes that morning that suggested he was attempting to reset, not give up. Then came the line that silenced the room. "I've always said he was sick, but I'm telling you now that Elvis was not prepared to die." Those around her leaned forward, questioning whether they were hearing her correctly, but she persisted, albeit slowly. He was talking about going away, not from people, but from the noise, from being Elvis. He told me once, about a week before his death, that he wished he could just be a man again, just a dude, somewhere calm. That is not something you say when you have given up. Nancy also pointed out something that most people overlooked. Elvis had a collection of books upstairs. Many of them discuss spirituality, health, and even personal development. He was looking for answers, she explained, not in pills anymore. He was beginning to realize how much of him had been handled, controlled. She did not pretend he wasn't struggling. Oh, he was in pain, she said. He had been harmed by those he trusted. He went in and out of sleep. He was swollen. He had all of those medications. I am not claiming he was fine, but I'm saying he was trying. That matters. Her remarks were quiet, but they were solid. They claim he overdosed, but I believe he was fatigued, not only physically but spiritually. That makes a difference. He was not irresponsible that morning. He was not high. He just wanted to sleep. She shared one more recollection, which she had never told anyone before. A few days before he died, he asked me if I thought people could start afresh. I responded yes, if they wanted to. And he replied, "Maybe I will. Maybe one day I'll wake up and leave all of this. Just disappear." He smiled as if he were half joking, but part of me wonders if he actually meant it. Those who heard her speak that day stated that her tone was not dramatic. It was not bitter. It was simply final. A final chapter from someone who had washed his linens, ironed his clothing, cooked his midnight meals, and stood in quiet on his deathbed. Before her death, longtime Graceland maid Nancy Rooks finally spoke up about Elvis Presley, and what she said did not change history. It reframed it. Elvis was not a king who disintegrated. He was a man striving to get back up, and perhaps he almost did. What she assumed happened to Elvis, but perhaps he never truly left. Nancy Rooks remained at Graceland for several years after Elvis's death, frequently working the night shift. Long after the excursions concluded, the mansion fell silent, or at least it appeared silent. In a rare interview, Nancy revealed something few expected and had never told before. She believed Elvis's spirit was still present. "Yeah, well," she said matter-of-factly, "I'd be cleaning in the trophy room, and the lights and other equipment would flash on and off because I worked late. I would advise Mr. Elvis to leave these lights alone since I can see." She wasn't trying to be scary. That was not her style. She was only sharing her experience, and she was not the only one. Other employees shared similar experiences over the years. Nancy stood out, however, since she spoke about it so naturally, like she was just talking about an obstinate employer who is still keeping an eye on his home. She remembers one night laying down on the platform where his uniforms and outfits were displayed in the trophy room. "I was lying down. I tried to sleep and take a nap, but someone shook my foot. I asked, 'What is this?' I jumped up. I didn't see anyone. I said, 'I know what you did, Mr. Elvis. You did it to wake me awake.'" She laughed, remembering. "That means I have to go to work, so I get up, hurry, and get out of here now." Nancy didn't find this disturbing. It was familiar. It was Elvis being himself, playful, present, and tough to ignore. She wasn't pursuing myths. She wasn't claiming he feigned his death. She was saying something quieter, something odd, that perhaps he hadn't completely left the house, the people who loved him, or the location he had called home. He adored that house. She said he loved us. I don't think he wanted to leave, at least not completely and perhaps in a discreet way. He didn't react. Nobody expected this. When word leaked about Nancy Rooks' final testimony, it did not make front-page news. There were no breaking headlines or viral hysteria. It began as a modest ripple posted on Elvis forums and whispered at fan conventions by collectors and hardcore Presley fans. Those who paid attention, however, realized right away that this was different. This was not merely a rehash of prior rumors. This was from someone who had lived in the house, had been present in the moment, and had never sought the spotlight. And now, over half a century later, she had finally spoken up. Initially, the reaction was mixed. Some admirers were brought to tears. They read her remarks and realized, perhaps for the first time, that they understood Elvis, not as a distant icon, but as a man, frail, complicated, and trying. One woman said in a fan group, "Nancy's words changed everything for me. I used to assume Elvis had given up. Now I believe he was simply tired of bearing everyone else's expectations." Others were skeptical. They questioned the timing. Why now? Why not say something sooner? Even the skeptics admitted that Nancy had nothing to gain. She had not packaged her recollections for commerce. She had not sought a documentary deal. She had merely talked before passing away shortly after. Her message hung in the air like incomplete words to a song that only she could sing. Among Elvis historians and biographers, her revelation sparked a quieter reckoning. For decades, the mainstream narrative remained simple. Elvis spiraled. Elvis overdosed. Elvis died too early because he was unable to escape the trap of fame. But Nancy's account did not contradict the facts. It reframed them. Instead of depicting him as irresponsible, she implied he was worn down, but on purpose, that he was considering significant change, that he had not let go of life. He had just become overwhelmed by it. Some pundits picked up on this distinction. A few lesser journals produced stories with titles such, "Was Elvis planning a comeback the world never saw?" or "The housekeeper who knew the king best." However, the mainstream media mainly kept their distance. After all, it wasn't a controversy. It was not marketable in the typical way. There were no allegations, lawsuits, or surprising new proof. Just a woman's voice, calm and resolute, presenting an alternate finish to a story that the world thought had ended. Nancy's statements, however, rekindled interest in Elvis's final months among his fans. Fans began re-watching old interviews and outtakes from his recent performances, hoping for indications and signals that he was planning something bigger than Graceland. Discussions turned from how he died to what he was trying to accomplish before his death. That was a significant shift. It provided room for hope, for the idea that Elvis wasn't simply fading, he was fighting. Then there were others who had met Nancy firsthand, former staff members, distant relatives, and Presley family friends. Many of them agreed that she had always been careful with her comments. According to one former coworker, she never said anything unless she truly believed it. So if Nancy says Elvis isn't ready to go, I believe her. In the end, her confession did not cause any controversy. It evoked compassion. It served as a reminder that legends take time to develop. They also do not crumble in one piece. Nancy's gentle truth was not explosive. It was human. It allowed Elvis to be remembered not as a guy defeated by fame, but as someone who, even in his closing moments, strived for something greater. And in that simple act of breaking her silence before her own death, Nancy Rooks offered Elvis something he rarely received in life: understanding. What we still do not know. Nancy Rooks left behind far more than she disclosed before her death. That is the nature of stories that exist behind closed doors. They are influenced equally by what is said and what is not. Graceland has since become a museum, a monument, a frozen version of Elvis's universe, carefully curated for the public. But here is the genuine Graceland, the one Nancy described, filled with late laughing, whispered chats, and quiet moments, only existed for a few people who genuinely lived there. The majority of them, including Nancy, have since passed away. Her final comments did not settle the mystery. They deepened it. Because if Elvis truly wanted to start again and move away from the spotlight, what prevented him? Was it too late physically? Was he simply surrounded by too many people, each with their own agenda? Or did he ultimately believe that the world would never accept a version of himself without the crown? There are still questions. Was there a talk that no one heard? A phone call was never made. Was there someone he was supposed to talk to that night? Nancy's evidence implies a man who is still deciding whether or not to act. But what's the truth? It probably perished with him. What remains is this: a woman who had seen everything but said nothing for nearly 45 years decided to speak up. And what she delivered was neither controversy nor spectacle. It was clear. Elvis, in her opinion, was not a broken idol. He was a person, flawed and burdened, but not without hope. Perhaps it is the legacy she wishes to leave behind. This is not a correction, but rather a reminder that even legends have quiet fantasies of escape. And often the most powerful stories are given not by the loudest voices, but by those who waited until the world was ready to listen. What prevented Elvis from starting afresh, leaving behind the weight of his stardom, and simply being a man again? More significantly, what would the world be like if he had lived to tell his own story?